My name is Nora Hayes, and I live in Seattle, United States. For 8 years, I believe my marriage to Ryan Cole was built on love, not money. But I was wrong. The truth revealed itself one gray morning when the sky matched my mood and the rain whispered secrets against our bay windows. Our craftsman-style home on Queen and Hill had once been my dream, a cedar porch, white trim, and a kitchen with a marble island I'd saved 3 years to afford. The house cost $1.2 million, and I had paid most of the down payment from my own savings, $300,000 I had earned from late nights and product launches at the tech firm where I worked. Ryan loved the house, but he loved the idea of wealth even more. Over the years, I began to notice how his kindness shifted with the direction. When bonuses arrived, he was warm, romantic, and talkative. When bills came, he turned cold, distant, as though affection had an interest rate. That morning, while the coffee machine hummed and the smell of cinnamon toast filled the air, I told him the story I'd rehearsed a dozen times. I said my parents in Boston had changed their will, leaving everything to my younger sister, Lily. I mentioned the duplex in Back Bay, worth about $2.4 million, the Cape Cod cabin valued at $650,000, and the investment portfolio close to $900,000, all supposedly gone from my inheritance. I watched his face carefully. At first, confusion, then disbelief, then something colder, disgust. He leaned back against the counter, folded his arms, and stared through me as if I were an inconvenience instead of his wife. "So," he said, "your parents are giving it all to Lily?" "Yes," I said softly. "They think she needs it more." He was silent for a while, his jaw tightening. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the vacations he'd planned, the remodels he'd hinted at, the investments he thought we'd make. By evening, he had made his decision. When I returned from work, a single suitcase stood by the front door. My favorite ceramic mug was missing from the kitchen shelf, replaced with a note. "You lied to me. You've ruined my trust." Ryan stood by the staircase, his voice steady. "I can't do this anymore, Nora. I can't build a life on uncertainty. You promised security, not this." I remember staring at him, numb. "Security," I repeated. "You're throwing me out because I don't have my parents' money?" He didn't answer. He simply opened the door, handed me my coat, and called a ride to the hotel downtown. The rain outside was relentless, and so was his silence. As I stepped out, my hand brushed against the doorknob, the one I had chosen after 3 weekends of browsing antique shops. That small touch made it real. I was being thrown out of my own home. The ride to the hotel was a blur. I stared out at the Seattle skyline, its lights blurry through raindrops on the window. When I checked into a small hotel near Pike Place Market, the clerk smiled and asked how long I'd be staying. I said, "I'm not sure," and paid $180 for the night. My hands shook as I slid my credit card across the counter. Up in the room, I dropped my bag and called Alice Grant, my lawyer and my parents' longtime family friend. She answered on the first ring. "What happened?" she asked. "He kicked me out," I whispered. Alice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't panic. The plan still stands." The plan. The one I'd kept buried deep beneath my calm exterior. Months earlier, I had suspected Ryan's affection was tied too closely to my financial worth. Every conversation about my parents ended with him asking how much they planned to leave me. When I mentioned I hadn't asked, he'd look irritated, as if my silence were reckless. That's when Alice helped me set up a trust, a secure legal wall around my assets. Blue Harbor Trust, she called it. It held everything my parents had already given me: a small condo in Chicago worth $410,000, a portfolio of $1.5 million in diversified investments, and cash accounts under my name. Ryan knew none of it. That trust was my insurance, my secret mirror to test Ryan's heart. Lying to him about losing my inheritance had been the final step. I needed to see what mattered more to him, me or the money. The answer came faster than I expected. As I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the city lights reflected on the wet glass, and I felt heartbreak turning into clarity. Ryan hadn't just left me. He had revealed himself. Alice texted me flight options for Boston. "Come here for a week," she wrote. "Rest. Let him think you're broken. We'll decide what comes next." I stared at the phone and thought of the man who once promised to protect me. I remembered our wedding day in a Boston garden, his vow to stand with me through fortune or loss. Now I realized those were just words to him, hollow as an empty bank account. I packed my laptop, paid for another 2 nights at the hotel, and began transferring all joint funds, $27 for 100, into a secure account under legal review. I wasn't going to fight dirty, but I wasn't going to be foolish either. That night, as rain drummed against the glass, I whispered to myself, "Let him keep the house. I'll keep my peace." The next morning, the sun peeked through the clouds for the first time in days. I took a walk down to the waterfront, watching ferries cut through the mist. I breathed in the salty air and realized something. Losing Ryan wasn't a loss. It was freedom disguised as heartbreak. He thought he had taken everything from me. He didn't know he had just set me free. And that was only the beginning. After Ryan threw me out, the silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. I moved into a temporary studio apartment in downtown Portland, small, clean, with creaky wooden floors and a single window that overlooked a quiet alley filled with ivy. It cost $1,600 a month, which felt manageable compared to the mortgage I had shared in Seattle. I spent the first 2 nights sitting by that window, sipping weak coffee and staring at the rain, replaying every moment of the past 2 years in my head. That's when I began to truly understand that what had happened wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the result of a pattern I had quietly ignored. I had seen the warning signs. The way Ryan's eyes lit up whenever he heard the words inheritance or investment. The way he'd lean over the counter and ask about my parents' finances like it was a casual conversation. He used to say, "Your family's done well. It must be nice knowing you'll never have to worry." It sounded harmless at first, but later his tone changed. He started asking specifics. How much the Boston property was worth, whether the Cape Cod cabin was under my name, and whether I had direct access to my parents' accounts. That was when I reached out to Alice Grant, my family's lawyer, and a woman I had trusted since my college days. She was sharp, calm, and had the kind of voice that could make chaos sound organized. I met her for lunch at a small cafe near Charles Street during one of my visits to Boston. Between bites of salad, I told her everything, my worries, Ryan's growing obsession with money, and my gut feeling that he was with me for the wrong reasons. Alice listened carefully, then put her fork down. "Nora," she said, "if you want to test loyalty, you don't ask for it, you take away the incentive." That was the beginning of my plan. With Alice's help, I moved all my inherited assets into a private trust, Blue Harbor Trust. It held $1.5 million in investments, and the rental condo in Chicago was worth $410,000, which generated around $2,100 a month. Legally, I was protected. Emotionally, I was terrified. Only Alice and I had signing rights, and everything was documented meticulously to prevent interference. The trust couldn't be touched in any divorce, and Ryan had no legal claim. At first, I thought I'd never need it. But I started noticing more cracks in our marriage. Ryan began suggesting that we refinance the Seattle house to free up cash. When I said I wanted to keep our finances stable, he called me selfish. He complained that my parents treated me like their financial favorite, as if I had asked to be born responsible. Then, one night after dinner, he said something that chilled me. "When your parents go, everything changes for us. We'll finally breathe." That was when I knew the man I'd married loved the future I represented, not the woman I was. So I told him the lie. I made up a story that my parents had changed their will and left everything to my sister, Lily. I pretended to be heartbroken. I even practiced the way my voice would tremble when I told him. I wanted to see what he'd do when money was no longer part of the equation. For a while, he tried to hide his reaction. He said we'd manage, that we'd make it work. But within days, I saw the change. He started blaming me for every small expense. He snapped at me when I bought groceries that weren't on sale. He talked about how hard it was to start over after realizing we'd never inherit anything. Then one morning, as I made coffee, he said flatly, "You should talk to your parents again. Maybe they'll reconsider." It wasn't a concern. It was a strategy. By then, I knew the test had served its purpose. The man I loved had failed it completely. When he finally kicked me out after my confession, I wasn't surprised. It was like watching a bad script unfold exactly as written. I spent that first night in the hotel, talking with Alice on the phone until midnight. She reminded me to stay calm, to document everything, and to remember that my silence now was power later. The next morning, I walked to the nearest branch of my bank and transferred our joint funds, $27,400, into an escrow account under my name, where it would stay until legal separation proceedings began. I sent Ryan an email with a full ledger and a note that read, "All funds accounted for. I'll cooperate through counsel." After that, I boarded a train to Portland. I needed air. The city was quieter than Seattle, with wide streets and kind strangers. I rented the little studio, bought a used desk for $60, and tried to rebuild a sense of peace. I worked remotely from my laptop, spending evenings walking along the Willamette River, watching lights shimmer on the water. Each night, the noise in my head softened a little. Alice checked in every few days, updating me on the status of the house, the trust, and preliminary filings. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. She reminded me that closure comes only after truth is seen. And then, one afternoon, while I sat in a cafe writing a project proposal, I received an email from my mother. The subject line read, "News about your sister." I clicked it, expecting a family update. Instead, my mother wrote, "Lily called this morning. She and Ryan have been spending time together. I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should know." I read the message 3 times, feeling the old ache pulse behind my ribs. So that was his next move. He thought he'd found a new way back into the wealth he thought he'd lost. I closed my laptop slowly, finished my coffee, and whispered, "Let him." Because what he didn't know is that every piece of the puzzle, every will, every trust, every property, was already locked tight. And when the day came, the truth would be public. I had kept my promise to myself. When money leaves, truth stays. And I was finally ready to see who would crumble under the weight of it. 3 months passed before I heard Ryan's name again. I had begun to find peace in Portland. Quiet mornings with black coffee, long walks along the river, and evenings when I didn't check my phone. Life had settled into something small but steady. Then one afternoon, my mother called from Boston. Her voice trembled in that way that always preceded bad news. "Nora," she said, "I thought you should know. Lily and Ryan are getting married next month. The invitations arrived today." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the wall, tracing the cracks in the paint with my eyes. My husband, no, my ex, was marrying my sister. The same sister who used to borrow my clothes and call me her role model. "They're holding it at the Windsor Hotel on Beacon Street," my mother continued softly. "Small ceremony. Family only. Family only." I almost laughed at that. After hanging up, I sat there in silence. Then I called Alice. She didn't sound surprised. "We knew this might happen," she said. "People like Ryan don't disappear. They relocate to wherever money still smells fresh." She was right. Ryan believed that my sister would inherit everything, so of course, he went after her next. But what neither of them knew was that the truth would meet them at the altar. I booked a flight to Boston for the day of the ceremony. Alice joined me. "You won't speak unless you need to," she advised as we landed. "Let them reveal themselves first." The Windsor Hotel was elegant in that old Boston way, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, staff with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. Alice and I checked into a modest room overlooking the park, just $140 a night. I wore a simple navy dress and flats. No jewelry, no makeup, no pretense. I wasn't there to impress anyone. The ballroom smelled of gardenias and tension. White linen draped the tables, and a string quartet played a soft tune near the stage. About 70 guests filled the chairs, murmuring politely. I recognized faces from both sides of the family, all pretending this wasn't a scandal wrapped in satin. When Ryan saw me, he froze for a second, then forced a smile. He approached, his expression perfectly rehearsed. "Nora," he said smoothly, "I'm glad you came. I hope you've made peace with everything. You look thinner. Eat some cake later, all right?" His tone dripped with false concern. I smiled faintly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Congratulations, Ryan," I said evenly. "You're getting exactly what you deserve." He blinked, confused, but before he could respond, the music shifted, and Lily walked down the aisle in a fitted lace gown. She looked nervous. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. I wondered if she knew what kind of man she was marrying, or if she was blinded by the same charm that once fooled me. The officiant began to speak, reading the usual vows. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But as Ryan stepped forward to take the microphone for his personal vows, I felt Alice shift beside me. She leaned in and whispered, "Now we let him talk." Ryan smiled confidently, his voice filling the room. "I stand here today grateful for love, for second chances, and for the lessons that life teaches us," he said. Then his eyes flicked toward me. "Some people lose everything because of lies. I just hope they find peace knowing what they've lost." The crowd murmured. I saw Lily glance between us, uneasy. He was trying to humiliate me publicly, to make me small one last time. Alice stood up. "Excuse me," she said calmly. Her voice was polite, but it carried authority. "Before this ceremony continues, I believe the family deserves to hear something important. It concerns the estate of Mr. and Mrs. Hayes." The room fell silent. Ryan frowned. "This isn't the time," he snapped. "Oh, it's exactly the time," Alice replied, walking to the front with a folder in hand. She pulled out a document, unfolded it carefully, and held it up. "This," she said, "is the updated will of Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, signed and notarized 6 months ago. It divides the estate equally between their 2 daughters, Nora and Lily. Not 1 cent more to either side." A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Ryan's smile faltered. Alice continued, her tone crisp. "Furthermore, I'd like to clarify a legal matter regarding Mrs. Nora Hayes' personal assets. Contrary to recent rumors, her investments, properties, and inheritance are fully protected under the Blue Harbor Trust, which she established before marriage. The trust contains a brokerage portfolio valued at $1.5 million, a Chicago condo worth $410,000, and her contribution of $300,000 to the Seattle home's down payment, all legally separate and untouchable." The violinist stopped mid-note. The officiant looked unsure whether to step aside or stay put. Guests whispered louder now, their eyes darting between Ryan and Lily. Ryan's face drained of color. He took a step backward, clutching the microphone, his voice cracking as he stammered. That can't be true," she said. "She told me she lost everything." I rose from my seat slowly. "I did," I said softly. "Just not what you think. I lost faith in you." Lily's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. My mother gasped quietly. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lily turned to Ryan, tears filling her eyes. "You used me," she whispered. "You never loved me. You just wanted the money." She walked down the aisle, leaving her veil trailing behind. Ryan reached after her, but stopped halfway. Then he turned toward me, desperation replacing arrogance. "Nora, please. I made a mistake. I thought." "Yes," I said, cutting him off. "You did." Alice placed a gentle hand on my arm. "We're done here," she murmured. As we left the ballroom, the murmurs grew louder, like a wave building behind me. The gardenias, the candles, the music, all blurred into a single haze. Outside, the Boston air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain and old brick. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. The test was over. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. Behind me, a wedding had ended before it began. Ahead of me, life was waiting, clean, steady, and mine alone. The divorce took 8 long months of paperwork, hearings, and uncomfortable silences. By the time it was finalized, I felt lighter, not because the process was easy, but because I had shed the last layer of a life built on illusion. The Seattle house sold for $1.2 million, and after clearing the mortgage and legal fees, I received $250,000. That money became the seed for the next version of my life. I used it to buy a narrow townhouse in Ballard, one of my favorite neighborhoods in Seattle. The place wasn't grand: 2 bedrooms, a small patio, and a kitchen that opened to a bright living area, but it felt like mine in a way nothing ever had. I paid $790,000 for it, keeping the mortgage small and manageable. The first night I moved in, I brewed coffee, unpacked 1 box of books, and sat on the floor beside the window watching the rain slide down the glass. It felt like starting over, not from loss, but from truth. I kept my full-time job as a product manager, but something inside me wanted to create more purpose from what I'd survived. I had learned hard lessons about financial independence and legal protection, the kind of lessons that too many women only learn when it's too late. So, using my savings and some of the trust income, I launched a small consulting business called Harbor North Consulting. My goal was simple: help women understand their finances, build legal safety nets, and separate emotional dependence from financial risk. In the first year, I earned around $220,000 in contracts, mostly through referrals and workshops. 10% of the profit went to a grant fund for single mothers who wanted to start small service-based businesses. My first recipient was a baker from Cleveland named Danielle, who dreamed of expanding her kitchen. When I sent her a $5,000 grant, she cried on the phone. I hung up feeling like my pain had finally been repurposed into something good. Ryan tried to contact me several times after the divorce. At first, it was through formal emails, polite, almost rehearsed. Then came the messages filled with regret. He said he was sorry, that he had been blinded by ambition, that he'd made a mistake. Sometimes he begged for a second chance. Each time, I replied with a simple, steady no. I didn't block him. I wanted him to know I saw his words and chose silence over anger. My refusal became my strength. Lily, on the other hand, reached out once. It was a handwritten letter that arrived on a spring morning. She apologized for her part in the chaos, admitting that she had been naive and easily influenced. She said Ryan had left her only weeks after the failed wedding, embarrassed and desperate. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she wrote, "but I needed to tell you I'm sorry." I didn't write a long reply. Just 2 lines. "I wish you peace. Please repay Mom for the $5,200 she spent on the hotel deposit." A month later, my mother confirmed she received the payment. That was closure enough for me. 2 years later, I had built a rhythm that felt like living, not surviving. My mornings started early, with mint tea or coffee, whichever matched my mood, and I'd open the balcony doors to let in the soft coastal air. My herb garden thrived: rows of basil, rosemary, and thyme lined neatly beside the railing. My work filled my days, and my evenings belonged to peace. Sometimes I took a ferry across the bay just to watch the city lights flicker from the water. I began mentoring younger women at a local nonprofit. Many of them reminded me of myself at 25, smart, ambitious, and dangerously trusting. I taught them about trusts, prenups, financial transparency, and emotional boundaries. It wasn't just about money. It was about self-worth. If someone loves you only when you're useful, I'd tell them, then they don't love you at all. Every once in a while, I hear small updates about Ryan through mutual friends. He had left Seattle and moved to Denver, where he bounced between jobs. The last I heard, he tried starting a real estate company, but it failed within a year. I didn't gloat. I simply felt detached, as if that chapter had happened to someone else. On the 2nd anniversary of that disastrous wedding day, I found myself standing in my Ballard kitchen, brewing coffee. The morning sun reflected off my stainless steel sink, turning it into a pool of light. I opened my laptop and reviewed the latest applications for my small business grants. One stood out: a young mother from Atlanta who wanted to start a digital marketing firm after leaving an abusive marriage. I approved her $5,000 grant without hesitation. That afternoon, I walked down to the pier and watched ferries glide across the calm water, carrying people toward new beginnings. The salty wind brushed my face, And I smiled. There was a time when I thought love meant endurance, staying even when you're hurting. Now I knew love could also mean letting go, setting boundaries, and choosing peace over chaos. People often ask me if I regret lying to Ryan about the will. My answer is always the same: no. I don't celebrate it, but I don't regret it either. It was the only way to see his true face before it was too late. That lie was my mirror, and what it reflected changed everything. Ryan punished himself more than I ever could. He chased a fortune that was never his, while I built a life that was entirely mine. I never wished him harm. I simply let time and truth handle him. Today, I live quietly. My townhouse smells of mint and lemon soap. My friends call me strong, but I think I'm just awake now. I spend weekends reading, painting, or visiting my parents in Boston. They're proud of the woman I've become, though sometimes my mother still tears up when she remembers that wedding scene. I tell her it was the best day of my life. It gave me back my freedom. If you ask me what love truly is, I'd say it's what remains when money and pretense leave the room. For me, it's the sound of my own voice, steady and certain, telling the truth. It's the comfort of a home bought with clean hands and the quiet joy of helping others build theirs. I no longer chase anyone's approval. I don't wait for apologies. I sleep peacefully, knowing I rebuilt my world brick by brick, without deception, without regret. And every morning, as sunlight spills across my kitchen counter, I whisper the same thing to myself: I made it.